Welcome to the Co-Parenting Conversations podcast, brought to you by the Center for Divorce Education. With renowned psychologist Dr. Donald Gordon, we will delve into the complex world of co-parenting during and after divorce and separation. Join us as we explore some of the emotional, legal, and practical aspects of parental breakups, helping you navigate this transformative journey with wisdom and guidance. Whether you're currently going through a divorce, contemplating separation, or supporting a loved one in their journey, the Center for Divorce Education is here to empower you with knowledge and offer you a roadmap towards a brighter future. The information presented in this podcast is intended for educational purposes only. The presentation of this material is not intended to constitute mental health therapy or to diagnose mental health disorders. The presentation of this material is not intended to constitute legal advice. Participants are encouraged to discuss specific legal questions with a licensed attorney of their choice.
Welcome back to the Co-Parenting Conversations podcast by the Center for Divorce Education. I'm Jaimie, and today we're diving into how research and instructional design principles can help shape more effective co-parenting programs. I'm here with our Executive Director, Dr. Don Gordon, and our Operations Manager, Mike Eubanks, who has a Master's of Education and handles most of our day-to-day program developments. Dr. Don, could you explain why instructional design is so critical for online co-parenting programs?
I think we have to ask ourselves, what's the reason that courts are requiring parents to take co-parenting programs? Assuming that by taking a co-parenting program, that's going to help them deal with the stresses of divorce and deal better with that than if they didn't have the program. But when you dive into it, how the course is designed is critical, because if the material isn't memorable, if people can't remember it, then they can't use it. And if you ask judges, would you order parents to take a class where the information was not used? And they would say, no, what's the point? But unfortunately, when you look at the instructional design of most of the co-parenting classes out there, it's really weak. And we'll get into some of the details about why. But our view is that if you're going to have parents take a class, the course should be designed in a way that the information is going to be remembered, that they're not going to forget about it within a day of taking the class, and that they can then use that information. And we use a skills-based approach, so we're teaching specific skills. So when they finish the course, they have skills that they didn't have before to deal with with themselves, their own stress, with their co-parent, and with their children. And these skills are critical, and the program being useful to them. We know that programs that have weak instructional designs don't show that there's any benefit for the people taking them. There's no research showing that there's a benefit. They often parents will say that they like the course. They're glad they took the course because they're hearing information they didn't know. There's a lot of good information. But the problem with that, let's take the typical 4-hour class where parents attend in person. They're having a 4-hour lecture, and in that 4-hour lecture, there's a lot of information. But then a day or two later, unless that's presented in a way that's going to help them remember it, it's gone. And if you can think about yourselves, when you've gone to a really interesting presentation, this lasted several hours, and you thought this is really good stuff, and then ask yourself several days later, how much do you remember? My own experience is very little. Unless I took detailed notes and went over the notes, I remember very little about the program.
Right. And that's just like, you go to college classes and you sit there and listen to the instructor, presenting the information. And later on, a week later, you learn something new and you totally forgot.
Yes, it's gone. So it's, in college, at least you're studying the notes that you took in class, and you're studying to try to keep that information fresh. But parents attending co-parenting classes, they're not, the majority of them are not taking notes and not studying them after the class is over. John Medina wrote a book called Brain Rules. He's a molecular biologist at University of Washington. And he talked about the way the brain works and how it helps people retain information in their memory. Some of the things that he says, it helps you remember something if you can relate, if there's an emotional hook, if you can relate to it emotionally and personally. Then it's easier for you to remember it because you have a personal relationship to it. Another thing he talks about is that in order to keep your attention when somebody's talking to you or you're reading something, you can pay attention for about 10 minutes and then your attention wanders. So you have to produce a brain shift, which means you have to have your brain do something else other than listen like try to find a piece in a puzzle, or look at an interesting design, or hear a funny joke. Um, and then you can go back and give somebody another 10 minutes where they can maintain their attention. Medina talks about brain shift, and talks about after 10 minutes, we need to shift the attention, and we need to be able to repeat the information. In our case, the skills we're teaching. And skills need to be repeated at least 4 or 5 times during the program for people to have a chance of remembering. The majority of co-parenting programs out there do not teach skills, and the few that do teach skills, they might mention the skill once or twice, not 4 or 5 or 6 times. So the repetition is really key to remembering. And you'll hear ads on the radio all the time where they'll tell you a phone number. They repeat the phone number 3 times because they know about this.
Yeah.
That's why they're doing it. But unfortunately, in the co-parenting classes, the information is good, but it's not repeated, so people don't hold on to it. When you look at the application of the principles and brain rules to courses that are offered, it's pretty discouraging that there's not much evidence that the person who designed the course knew anything about instructional design. And if you look at Zoom classes in particular, where parents are looking at a computer screen for 4 hours, you've all been on Zoom classes, and you can be appearing to the instructor to be paying attention because your eyes are looking at the screen, but the instructor doesn't know what's on the screen. You can be on different websites, you can be doing all sorts of different things, and no one knows. And since classes don't offer quizzes to quiz you on what you're learning, there's no motivation to pay attention. You just have to, show up and register, and then you get credit.
Well, that is really great information to have for parents or professionals that are looking at parenting classes. It is important to do brain shifts and to have the information be interesting enough to have the users engaged in it. So, Mike, could you start by introducing our listeners to Gagne's 9 events of instruction and how they relate to learning design?
Yeah, no problem. So Robert Gagne was an educational psychologist, and in 1965, he actually created what he called the 9 events of instruction. And it's basically an instructional design model. And he developed this after he was observing thought processes of adults when they were presented with new mental challenges. And so the model focused on how are these folks going to be able to achieve learning goals? And then he created instructional events to help them reach that, help them obtain that. I'll briefly explain the 9 events and then maybe give you some examples of how we use those in our courses. So 1 is to gain attention of the students. You have to present a stimulus to grab their attention right off the bat. Number 2 is informing students of the objectives. So you want to actually tell the students, what are the outcomes for this course? In individual lessons, what is our goal here? What is our objective of this whole thing? You want the students to know that before you start any instruction. So 3 is stimulate recall of prior learning. So what you want to do as much as possible is relate the new things that you're teaching to something that that person has already either experienced or already knows. So it's going to be easier for them to grab these new pieces of information if you relate it to stuff that they already know.
Right. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. And then finally, number 4 is actually present the instruction, right? Present the content. So there's some prep involved before you just jump right in. Presenting content's the 4th step. It's not the 1st step.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
And when you do that, you actually want to make sure that you're organized and you're grouping content in meaningful ways. It doesn't seem random. You're not jumping around. There's a good sequence of that learning of that new material. Then number 5, which is a big one for us that I'll talk about, is provide learning guidance. Okay, so along with the new material, you want to give the students strategies so that they can learn this new content and what resources are available. You're giving them guidance on how to absorb and what to look for in these new, in our case, new skills, right? But also new information that you're giving them.
Right.
Number 6 is another important one, which is elicit performance. And that's just a fancy way of saying practice. So you want to have students actually apply what they've learned to reinforce these new skills, to make sure that they're understanding these new concepts. And we have practice exercises in all of our programs, right? To give
Right.
them that little bit of practice before they kind of go out in the real world and try these things.
Okay.
Number 7, provide feedback. So you always want to give timely feedback of their performance to see how they're doing as they go. And this is even, this is before you're testing anything, right? You want to give feedback, give them those chances to try things. It's kind of part of the practice is, practice tests or different things where they're trying these new skills and trying to identify these new things that they're learning. Then you can finally, number 8, assess performance, testing. So yeah, test whether they have met those outcomes that you talk about in the very beginning. Like, here's what we're trying to do. Let's go through all these steps. And then now we're going to test you on that. Did you get it? Did you understand all of these new skills and the new information that we gave?
Right. Okay.
And then finally, the last thing, and a really important one, and this goes to what Dr. Don was talking about the repetition, is enhancing retention and transfer. So you want to provide as many opportunities as you can to connect what they're learning to real world things. How can we make sure that parents are taking these skills with them after they've finished the course?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so in a nutshell, those are the 9 events of instruction that Gagne developed. And it's important to know that there's not just one correct way to do all of these steps. There are many different ways to achieve these, but you want to really make sure when you're designing instruction, this is not just for co-parenting, this is for any instruction that you're designing for anyone. You want to try to make sure you're hitting each one of these events to really
At some
maximize,
point.
to really maximize, the learning.
Right.
If you can hit all these points, you're going to have much better outcomes from your instruction than if you just ignore this and try to come up with something without any kind of framework. This is an instructional design framework to use.
Right. Right. Instead of just throwing out information and hoping that it sticks,
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How are Gagne's 9 events used in the instructional design of the Children in Between and High Conflict Solutions programs?
So I'll give you a couple of examples. One, let's talk about gain attention, right? That's the first step. So how do we do that? Again, there's more than one way to do this, but how do we gain attention? Like Dr. Don said, the emotional hook. So we use an emotional hook to get parents engaged. We want to make sure that our scenarios and the lessons in our courses are personally relevant to the folks taking the class. So all of the scenarios in our courses are the most common problems that co-parents see in those co-parent interactions and relationships. So if parents are seeing themselves and their own family in those scenarios, they're much more likely to actually engage with the course and remember those lessons later on. So we use an emotional hook to gain attention.
Right. And you're referring to the video content, right?
Yes. Those video scenarios are all based on, Dr. Don's research of what are the common problems that always come up in co-parenting situations, right? Money problems, carrying messages, putting down the other parent. Almost every co-parent relationship sees one of those at some point in their journey, right? So we want to make these lessons personally relevant to the people taking the class.
Okay.
And then just another example, we talked about providing guidance, right? We do something that I've never seen any other class do, and it's what we call guided questions. After each video clip, we go through a set of study questions where we're presenting the question to the parent. And we actually, there's a pause or they have to click a button. We want them to actually think through that question from the video they just watched, but then we actually give them the answer, right? So we want them to at least think about it for a minute first, see if they can come up with it, then give them the answer. And so this helps parents take away the most relevant parts of the lessons. It directs attention to the new skills that are being taught, right? A lot of these communication skills are brand new to all of these parents taking this. We want to guide them through this as much as we can to pick up, the nuances of how to craft an iMessage. How do I actually engage in active listening? and we repeat these skills over and over and over again throughout the course to give them that repetition. But then we also use these guided questions to walk them through, to guide them through these new skills.
Right,
So
right. And that's somewhat like flashcards almost,
very much so. Yes, very much so. It's we're guiding them to the points we want them to catch in these video scenarios. What skill did mom use here that really helped that interaction come out better? Okay,
Right.
let's work through that to make sure that you caught that. So
Yeah.
we do that all throughout our courses. We have these guided questions that are leading the parent to the right answer. We're not this is not a test yet. We're still providing them guidance on how to pick out those new skills out of the videos.
Right.
And so then they'll remember them, and then they will actually try to incorporate that into their interactions in real life. So
Right.
that's the idea and then that leads to that transfer, that retention and transfer into real life.
Obviously instructional design is crucial in making co-parenting programs effective.
And
I
all
would
instruction, any instruction.
All of it. Yeah, exactly.
Not just co-parenting. There are more models. This is not the only one, but this is a great, kind of tried and true and been used so many times to create effective instruction. So when courts are looking, when attorneys are looking, even when parents are looking for a class, look for the instructional design. Did they use an instructional design model to come up with this? Or did somebody just make a PowerPoint and throw it online?
Right, exactly. Look for something that will actually benefit you in the long run and not just, a PowerPoint presentation that you'll forget in 20 days. So, yeah, I would say it's clear from today's conversation that a well-designed co-parenting program can make all the difference for families going through separation or divorce. So, thank you, Mike and Dr. Dawn, for your expertise here. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Until next time.